Nothing in Genoa City ever stays buried for long, but these next 2 weeks carry a more dangerous feeling, as if the lies are no longer content to sit quietly beneath polished floors and family names. They are rising all at once, pushing through old loyalties, reopening injuries that never truly healed, and forcing every person who thought they could manage the fallout to face a harsher truth. This is not the kind of storm that arrives with warning. It begins in smaller moments, in the silence after a betrayal is exposed, in the hard stare between two people who once trusted each other, in the sickening realization that one reckless choice has already set 10 other disasters in motion. In Genoa City, anger is no longer private, guilt is no longer containable, and every fragile alliance is beginning to crack. What makes it worse is that nobody is entirely innocent. Some are trying to protect family. Some are trying to preserve power. Some are trying to rewrite the meaning of what they have done so they can still live with themselves. But intent means very little once damage has taken root, and the city is about to watch that damage spread through the Winters family, through Newman bloodlines, through marriages already hanging by a thread, and through secrets that were meant to stay hidden long enough to never matter again. Lily stands at the center of one of those explosions, and the most painful part is not that others are condemning her. It is that a part of her knows they have reason to. What she did in aligning herself with Victor during the fake kidnapping ordeal was never a simple misstep. It was a deliberate act, a calculated gamble made by a woman who believed she could navigate ruthless territory without becoming fully consumed by it. She told herself there had been a larger purpose, that there were outcomes worth controlling, risks worth managing, consequences she could absorb later. But consequences are rarely obedient in Genoa City. They do not arrive one at a time. They arrive as judgment, humiliation, fractured trust, and the unbearable look in the eyes of the people who once believed you were better than the game you were playing. Devon's anger toward Lily is not simply moral outrage. It is personal disappointment sharpened into something colder, because for him this is not merely about one bad decision. It is about the pattern beneath it, the possibility that Lily has spent too long telling herself she can survive in Victor's world without becoming another extension of his manipulation. Nate, too, is furious, but his fury comes with a different kind of edge. He sees in Lily's deception a betrayal of shared values, a willingness to cross lines and then rationalize them afterward. That is the part that stings him most. He can understand ambition. He can understand miscalculation. What he struggles to forgive is the arrogance of believing she alone could manage a dangerous alliance and decide which truths others were allowed to know. Lily feels cornered, but she is too proud to collapse under the weight of their condemnation. That pride is both her armor and her weakness. She pushes back internally against the idea that she should bear this alone, when Victor has long trained an entire city to operate by distorted rules, when Cain has played his own games, when men in positions of power are often excused as strategic, while women are condemned as deceptive. Yet even that bitterness cannot fully silence the truth pressing against her conscience. She did choose secrecy. She did choose control over honesty. She did underestimate the emotional wreckage. So her anger becomes divided, with half of it aimed outward and half of it turning inward. And that kind of division is dangerous because it makes every response sharper, every decision more defensive, every new conflict feel like a fight for survival rather than a chance at repair. When Phyllis comes at her next, Lily is already raw enough to turn that confrontation into a battlefield. Phyllis has her own reasons for coming in hot, and none of them are simple. Her clash with Lily is not only about Cain, or betrayal, or shifting loyalties. It is about identity. Phyllis has built her entire life around refusing to be dismissed, refusing to be cornered, refusing to let other people decide when she is too much, too dangerous, too ambitious, too unforgivable. So when she looks at Lily's actions and sees another woman helping destabilize territory connected to Cain and the power struggles surrounding him, she does not merely see strategy. She sees treachery dressed up as necessity. More than that, she sees the possibility of being outplayed, and Phyllis never reacts well when she senses that she is no longer the most unpredictable force in the room. Their conflict becomes vicious because both women are too intelligent to argue only over surface issues. Beneath every accusation is a deeper insult. Beneath every judgment is resentment over what the other represents. Lily sees in Phyllis a woman who hides selfishness behind emotional intensity and calls it honesty. Phyllis sees in Lily a woman who hides ruthless ambition behind composure and calls it responsibility. Neither interpretation is completely fair, yet neither is completely wrong. That is what makes their feud so explosive. They are not just attacking each other's choices. They are attacking each other's self-image. Victoria's arrival with Summer's furious letter adds another layer of emotional pressure around Phyllis. And it lands with devastating force precisely because Phyllis has spent so much of her life insisting that her children would someday understand her. Summer's words do not simply express disappointment. They expose a widening gap between Phyllis and the daughter whose respect she keeps trying to preserve while making decisions that almost guarantee more damage. Victoria, in delivering the letter, does not need to say much to wound her. Her presence alone carries the unmistakable message that the Newman machine is watching, judging, measuring weakness, and preparing to capitalize on it. Yet even then, Phyllis does not back down. She clings harder to the idea of protecting Newman's empire, not because she is blind to the personal cost, but because surrender now would mean admitting that all the pain she has caused, all the relationships strained or scarred along the way, led to nothing solid enough to justify it. This is how Phyllis traps herself. The more her choices hurt the people she loves, the more desperately she insists those choices must still lead somewhere meaningful. Otherwise, she would have to sit with a truth she cannot bear, that she once again burned parts of her own life to prove she could not be controlled. Elsewhere, the emotional devastation around Dominic brings Abby and Devon into a far more intimate kind of terror, one that has nothing to do with boardrooms or revenge and everything to do with the helplessness of watching a child carry trauma he cannot fully express. When they receive troubling news about Dominic and the possibility that the kidnapping has left deeper psychological scars, their fear immediately mutates into guilt. Abby feels it as a mother first, in the instinctive, brutal way only a mother can, as if every adult failure around her son should somehow have been prevented by her vigilance. Devon feels it through protection and responsibility, through the crushing realization that the consequences of adult chaos have seeped into a child's inner world. Their grief is complicated by rage, because trauma in a child feels like an offense that demands a target, and there are plenty of targets to choose from. The fake kidnapping itself becomes more monstrous in hindsight. Every person who treated it as leverage, as a move, as something temporary and manageable, now has to reckon with the possibility that Dominic will carry echoes of it long after the perpetrators have moved on to other schemes. That pain naturally intensifies Abby and Devon's bitterness toward Mariah. Even if Mariah avoids prison and instead begins treatment at a psychiatric facility, mercy is hard to celebrate when Dominic may pay the price for years to come. Abby's resentment is especially volatile because it collides with her capacity for compassion. She does not want to be cruel to a woman who is clearly unwell, and yet maternal pain does not obey moral elegance. It wants an outlet. It wants someone to blame. Devon, though more restrained on the surface, is not immune to that darkness either. He begins to question whether the entire culture of excuse-making in their world has gone too far, whether people are forever demanding understanding after they have already shattered someone else's peace. In quieter moments, both Abby and Devon may hate themselves for thinking this way, but private shame does not erase the impulse. It only buries it deeper, where it can poison tenderness and harden grief into cold judgment. Mariah enters treatment carrying her own collapse, and what is so tragic is that recovery does not arrive with instant redemption. She is not walking into help with clarity or relief. She is walking in stripped down by guilt, by fear of herself, by the knowledge that love alone did not stop her from becoming dangerous. The worst torment for Mariah is not merely what she did. It is the impossible question underneath it. If she was capable of this once, what else might she be capable of under pressure, paranoia, or emotional fracture? That question follows her into every sterile hallway, every forced moment of reflection, every attempt to rebuild a self she can trust. She misses Tessa, but missing Tessa only amplifies the agony, because it reminds her what she could lose permanently. And Tessa, left outside to manage the household fragments and her own grief, faces the cruel emotional contradiction of loving someone broken while no longer feeling safe in that love. That is why Danny's unexpected proposal to Tessa and Daniel becomes more than a career possibility. It becomes a temptation, an escape route, a reminder that life continues to offer momentum even while personal disaster demands stillness. For Tessa, the opportunity carries both hope and guilt. Music has always represented expression, healing, movement, the possibility of building something beautiful from pain. But accepting such an offer while Mariah is in treatment feels dangerously close to emotional abandonment, even if rationally Tessa knows her own life cannot be indefinitely suspended. Daniel, too, is drawn into a moral gray zone. He can see the artistic potential, the practical benefits, the lifeline it could throw both of them professionally. Yet he is not blind to the emotional timing. If he encourages Tessa too strongly, he risks becoming one more force pulling her away from the marriage she still insists she wants to save. If he discourages it, he risks asking her to sacrifice herself again in the name of someone else's crisis. The tension here is exquisite because nobody is acting like a villain, and yet the choice still threatens to leave damage behind. This is the kind of dilemma that hurts most in soaps, the one where no answer feels clean and every act of self-preservation can be mistaken for betrayal. Far from Genoa City, Nick descends into an uglier and far more physically dangerous spiral in Las Vegas. His vulnerability is not only chemical, it is emotional, existential, and disturbingly convenient for the wrong people. He has always seen himself as one of the steadier Newman men, less theatrical than Victor, less erratic than Adam, more grounded than the chaos constantly circling the family. That self-concept is exactly what makes this unraveling so harrowing. Because once Nick starts crossing the line into drug use, once he begins justifying each bad decision as temporary, manageable, or necessary to mute whatever is roaring inside him, he enters a territory where pride becomes lethal. He cannot tolerate being seen as weak, so he hides more. He cannot tolerate being controlled, so he resists help. He cannot tolerate facing whatever emotional collapse pushed him here in the first place, so he reaches for another numbing hit and tells himself he still has a grip on reality. But the city's predators recognize denial faster than loved ones do, and Matt Clark is exactly that kind of predator. Matt's interest in Nick is not random. He senses vulnerability the way some men sense opportunity in stock markets or courtrooms. Nick, impaired and increasingly unstable, is useful. He is prey, leverage, a means of settling old scores while destabilizing Newman territory from the inside. Matt's methods are unlikely to be purely physical. Men like him understand the value of psychological corrosion. He does not just want Nick cornered. He wants him disoriented, dependent, easier to manipulate, easier to shame, easier to set up. There is a special cruelty in targeting someone during a chemical spiral because it allows the aggressor to blur the line between victimhood and culpability. If Nick goes missing, who will trust his judgment? If he lashes out, who will believe he was provoked? If he remembers fragments, who will know which parts are true? This creates a perfect arena for Matt to close in, tightening the trap while making it look like Nick is destroying himself all on his own. The horror of this story lies in how plausible that illusion becomes. Sharon's growing fear about Nick deepens the emotional stakes because she understands him in ways that others do not. She can read the strain beneath his silences, the self-protective habits he falls into when he is spiraling, the false normalcy he performs when he wants to avoid concern. But that insight becomes its own torment. To sense danger and still be unable to stop it is a terrible kind of helplessness. Sharon begins to feel that old, familiar dread of loving someone whose pain might once again drag both of them into darkness. Yet she is no longer the woman she used to be. She has fought too hard for her own equilibrium to let Nick's unraveling swallow her whole. That creates a brutal internal conflict. She wants to save him, but she also knows that trying to rescue people at the expense of herself has cost her dearly before. When Phyllis notices Sharon looking burdened and wonders how she can help, the irony is sharp. These are two women with a long history of conflict, both now orbiting the same endangered man in different ways, both confronting the possibility that their past grudges may become irrelevant if Nick truly disappears into something worse. Adam's storyline runs parallel to Nick's, but in a darker, more symbolic register. His descent into the world associated with Spider-Man is not merely about risk, it is about identity seduction. Adam has always been uniquely vulnerable to roles that let him turn pain into persona. He knows how to reinvent himself, how to weaponize intelligence, how to survive emotional abandonment by becoming whatever the moment requires. But the deeper he moves into dangerous territory, the more he risks losing the fragile line between performance and truth. There is always a part of Adam that is drawn to Shadow because Shadow feels honest to him. It makes room for his resentment, his cunning, his conviction that people have never fully let him belong unless he made himself useful or terrifying. The tragedy is that Adam often recognizes the danger intellectually and still steps toward it emotionally. He tells himself he is gathering information, protecting the family, staying one move ahead. Yet a man with Adam's history does not enter such a world untouched. It awakens the old instinct to become what others fear, especially when that feels easier than begging to be trusted. Back in Genoa City, Nikki's possible discovery about Patty through Jack opens a completely different front in the war against Victor. Nikki's resentment toward her husband is layered with years of history, compromise, endurance, and repeated disappointment. She knows better than most that Victor often confuses love with domination, protection with control, family stewardship with the right to decide everyone else's fate. If she can extract the truth about Patty and see how it might be used to counter Victor, it is not simply because she wants revenge. It is because she is tired of the gravitational force of his choices dictating the emotional weather of the entire family. Jack, meanwhile, is never comfortable when old ghosts like Patty resurface, because Patty represents the kind of chaos that cannot be cleanly contained. She is memory, obsession, violence, pity, and threat all at once. If Jack gives Nikki enough information to arm her against Victor, he does so knowing that any weapon forged from Patty's past is unstable. Still, there are moments when people become willing to use unstable weapons because they believe the man on the other side has gone too far. Nikki may reach exactly that point. There is power in a woman who has spent years enduring a titan's methods and finally decides endurance is no longer a virtue. Victor, for his part, continues moving like a man convinced history will justify him. His hostility toward Cain is not impulsive. It is rooted in his need to dominate every arena where legacy, influence, and loyalty intersect. If he promised Cain more pain, then he will deliver it with the cold satisfaction of a man who believes punishment is proof of strength. Cain becomes both adversary and symbol, someone Victor can crush to remind others what happens when they challenge Newman authority. Yet Victor's confidence may conceal a looming miscalculation. When a man uses power long enough without meaningful restraint, he begins to assume resistance will always splinter before him. What he may fail to anticipate is the cumulative effect of all the people he has pushed too hard at once. Lily's disillusionment, Nikki's anger, Jack's knowledge, Adam's volatility, Nick's vulnerability, Victoria's distance, and the broader fallout of his manipulations may converge into something less predictable than a simple counterattack. It is one thing to rule through fear when everyone is isolated. It is another when emotional wreckage begins uniting the people who used to suffer separately. Sienna's arrival in this already unstable world introduces a quieter but no less potent source of tension. Her accidental glimpse of Noah and Audra revisiting old memories may seem minor beside kidnappings, drugs, and power games, yet emotional triangles have a way of detonating at precisely the wrong moment in Genoa City. Sienna is not merely jealous. She is alarmed by what she sees, because intimacy with an ex is rarely just about nostalgia. It is about unfinished business, unresolved chemistry, unhealed wounds, or the craving to revisit a version of oneself that once felt more exciting, more understood, or less constrained. Noah, who often carries emotional conflict in a gentler register than the people around him, may not intend harm. But intention means little when old feelings are carelessly stirred. Audra, on the other hand, is rarely careless. Even in vulnerable moments, she understands the impact of proximity, memory, and suggestion. If she allows herself to drift into that emotional space with Noah, it is likely because some part of her either misses the power of what they had or wants to prove she still holds it. Sienna, seeing this, is forced into the humiliating position of deciding whether to confront what may be happening, bury her insecurity, or preemptively harden herself against betrayal before it becomes undeniable. That tension can quickly poison romance because suspicion rarely waits for proof. Once it enters, every glance becomes evidence and every explanation feels rehearsed. Meanwhile, Malcolm Winters and Dr. Stephanie Simmons loom on the horizon as the bearers of another story capable of reshaping Genoa City for the long term. Their return does not feel incidental. It feels loaded. as if the past is sending in reinforcements for a battle the present is no longer equipped to handle. The possibility that Holden could be their long-lost son opens the door to one of the most emotionally volatile themes in the genre: identity discovered too late. If Holden is indeed connected to them by blood, then the revelation threatens to force every one of them into painful reckoning. Malcolm would have to confront the years stolen by absence, the mistakes that may have contributed to it, and the terrifying question of whether blood still matters after so much life has already been lived apart. Stephanie would face a different torment, one rooted in memory, secrecy, and whatever circumstances led to the loss in the first place. Holden, if drawn into this truth, would not receive it as some neat emotional blessing. Men do not simply absorb life-altering lineage revelations without rage. He would have every right to ask where they were, why this took so long, what he is supposed to do with a history he never got to own. Family secrets of this scale do not create instant healing. They create shock, defensiveness, false starts, and the temptation to reject the truth before it has the chance to demand too much. All of these threads are connected by one emotional law. Every character is being forced to face the gap between what they told themselves and what reality now demands. Lily told herself she could manage Victor without becoming compromised. Phyllis told herself her choices would someday be vindicated. Abby and Devon told themselves Dominic would be spared from the ugliest consequences. Mariah told herself love and remorse might somehow be enough to contain what she had done. Tessa told herself patience could preserve both her marriage and her own identity. Nick told himself he still had control. Adam told himself he could descend into darkness without letting it claim him. Nikki told herself she could continue enduring Victor's methods without eventually turning against him. Noah perhaps told himself old feelings could be revisited safely. Audra may have told herself memory is harmless until it becomes leverage. Holden, Malcolm, and Stephanie each may be about to discover that the stories they have lived by are incomplete. That is what makes these weeks feel so rich with danger. No one is simply fighting an external enemy. They are fighting the collapse of their own narratives, and when people lose control of the story they have been telling themselves, they become unpredictable. That is when emotional wounds turn into reckless decisions. That is when a mother's fear becomes unforgiving judgment. That is when romantic jealousy becomes sabotage. That is when grief becomes obsession, guilt becomes aggression, and the desire to protect family becomes indistinguishable from the urge to control it. Genoa City is approaching exactly that threshold. Every unresolved fracture is widening. Every private weakness is becoming visible to the wrong people. Every attempt to hold power is triggering a counterforce somewhere else. This is why the coming fallout will not be limited to one feud or one family. It will ricochet. Lily and Phyllis may think they are only fighting each other, but their war feeds into wider instability around Kane, Victor, and Newman interests. Nick's spiral may seem isolated in Las Vegas, yet Sharon's worry, Matt's predation, and Adam's dangerous entanglements suggest something far bigger is forming around the Newman sons. Abby and Devon's pain over Dominic may intensify resentment that spills into other relationships. Tessa and Daniel's opportunity may look professional on the surface, yet emotionally it could reshape multiple lives. Nikki's move against Victor may begin as justified retaliation and end as another chapter in the endless cycle of mutual destruction that defines their marriage. What makes this chapter especially compelling is that nobody can remain passive. Even the characters trying to keep their heads down are being drafted into emotional warfare. Victoria becomes messenger and witness in a conflict she cannot fully neutralize. Jack becomes keeper of dangerous information. Sharon becomes one of the few people able to sense Nick's decline before disaster fully hits. Sienna becomes accidental observer of a betrayal in progress. Daniel becomes unwitting participant in a moral test involving loyalty, ambition, and timing. These are not the kind of stories where neutrality survives. Once the truth starts surfacing, everyone must choose whether to intervene, exploit, forgive, expose, retreat, or strike first. And because so many of them are already emotionally compromised, their choices are likely to come from hurt rather than wisdom. So the real tension of these 2 weeks is not simply about what will happen. It is about who these people will become while it happens. Will Lily harden into someone who believes betrayal is survivable as long as the endgame remains intact? Or will she finally admit that power acquired through deception poisons the one thing she truly needs, trust? Will Phyllis cling so fiercely to control that she destroys the last fragile bridges to her children? Or will Summer's fury force a genuine reckoning? Will Abby and Devon allow grief for Dominic to pull them into bitterness they may later regret? Will Mariah's treatment become the first step toward rebuilding, or merely the place where she realizes how much she has already lost? Will Tessa choose duty over self, or finally claim the part of her life that still wants to move forward? Will Nick recognize the trap before Matt closes it entirely, or will his pride deliver him straight into enemy hands? Will Adam emerge as an ally, an anti-hero, or a man once again consumed by the darkness he thought he could negotiate with? Will Nikki's anger become the one force strong enough to humble Victor, or simply the spark that ignites another family war? And if Malcolm, Stephanie, and Holden truly are tied by blood, will that revelation heal ancient wounds or tear open new ones that last for years? The beauty of this kind of soap storytelling, in my view, is that the most devastating twists are never only about plot. They are about emotional exposure. A fake kidnapping matters because it reveals who was willing to lie and why. A letter matters because it proves resentment has finally found words. A psychiatric diagnosis matters because it reminds everyone that adult chaos leaves marks on children. A music offer matters because timing can turn hope into guilt. A drug spiral matters because strong men often fall hardest when they cannot admit they are falling. A glimpse between ex-lovers matters because unfinished emotion is one of the most dangerous substances in any relationship. A long-lost child theory matters because blood may answer one question while destroying the life built without it. These stories matter when they force characters to stand naked before the truth of themselves, and that is exactly what Genoa City is about to do. By the time these 2 weeks unfold, the city will feel less like a place of separate dramas and more like a pressure chamber where every secret is feeding the same fire. Nobody will walk away untouched. Some will be humiliated. Some will be exposed. Some will double down so recklessly that their future damage becomes inevitable. Some may finally see themselves clearly for the first time and hate what that reflection shows. That is the pulse running beneath every storyline now. Not safety, not closure, not balance, but escalation. The emotional debts are coming due, and once they are collected, Genoa City may never return to the version of itself these characters thought they still controlled.